Strike up the band.
In this episode, I'm going to give you some tips on how to simplify grading. Should band be an easy A? Well, the short answer is probably not. But I'm going to start off with telling you what I tell my students on the first day of class when I'm giving them all of my policies and everything. I tell them that band is not an easy A, but it's easy to get an A. And there's a big difference in that. So there's no reason, what I'm telling my students, and I end up explaining this to them, is that there's no reason that everybody shouldn't get an A, but you're not going to get an A just because you showed up to class. You're going to have to work for it. So I stole this whole idea from watching soccer coaches. Now, soccer coaches and probably all sports coaches, they are great at grading to a standard, not unlike what a lot of classroom teachers do. And I'll give you an example. A soccer coach does not give you a B. If they're practicing driving the ball into the goal and you don't make it, you get back in line and you do it again. You get back in line, you do it again. You get back in line, you do it 100 times until you can get that ball into the goal or whatever they're working on. You're going to keep repeating it until you get it. And we do this in music already. This is part of what we do. Now just make a slide and incorporate it into your grading practices as well. And that makes it much simpler. So some ways to do this. I create a culture of high standards, and I tell the students I only give you 2 grades. You either get an A on a playing assessment or a retake. I don't give a B because you almost got it or you got it 90% of the right. In fact, we talk about this all the time. There are some kids, they're like, I did pretty good. Why didn't I pass it? And I said, well, you missed that rhythm in measure 3. And then instead of an A flat, you played an A natural in measure 7. And in any other class, you would have gotten a 93%. But in band, we're aiming for 100%. And they seem to really get that. Here's a couple of things that come about because of that. It makes it easier to enter grades because all I'm doing is entering an A for everybody. And most grading systems, you can fill in all the grades with the same grade. And almost all of my students have A's because I demand it from them. I'll give you a couple of examples. There was one time I had a class, the biggest class I've ever had. I know some people have bigger bands than this that you're grading, but the biggest class I ever had was 64 guitar players. And I explained my grading system to them. This was probably about a decade ago now. At the end of the semester, 60 of them had A's, 1 had a C, and 3 had F's. The 3 F's are pretty obvious. They came to class every day. They didn't do a single thing. They stared at the ceiling. And what I like to do when I share this story with my students is I tell them they're just drooling in my classroom and doing absolutely nothing. The one student who got the C, he spent the first half of the semester doing that, but then he's like, I better get serious and I'm going to try to catch up. So that's why he got a C. Before you say, oh, it must be nice to teach at schools where this is possible, I just want to say that the last assignment I had was at a Title I school, middle school even, and 80% of my students had an A+ in band class. It was very easy to grade their assignments. The 20% who did not have an A+, they literally were missing school 20 to 50% of the time, and most of them still had a passing grade in band, like at a C, and often band was their only grade that they were passing. So they'd have a C in band, even though they were only at school 50 to 80% of the time, and then failing most of their other classes. I spent many years grading for pencil and bringing your music and trying to keep track of daily points, and it just seemed like it took a lot of work. Now, I still hold students to a high standard for these things, and I put it all in a grade I call, for example, right now in the class I'm teaching, we have a first term participation grade. And if I have to, I'll subtract some things from that grade if students are having trouble bringing their instruments or something like that. But I don't have a daily grade that I do that. I just will take off points for the occasional student that has a problem. But rarely past the first 2 weeks do I have students forgetting this. I just follow up on it so much with their instruments. If they forget, I call home. I check their books almost every day. And by the time we get 2 weeks in, it's a rarity. These 1 or 2 students that have trouble with bringing their instruments, I kind of tell them I'd rather they leave their instruments at school and not practice at home than to miss days and days and days of school practice. Now, it might not seem couth because it's like, okay, those students aren't practicing like they should, but I'd rather them have that time in class than anything they do at home. It's more important. I hope that these tips have helped you to simplify your grading practice.
The Music Ed Podcast, where you get quick and easy tips for how to be a better band teacher.